Hello and welcome to the Christ Baptist Church Devotional. We're going through the book of Genesis, and we're now finding ourselves in Genesis chapter 39. It's been a while, been a number of weeks since we've been in Genesis chapter 38. I had some time off, and now we're back into Genesis chapter 39. And basically, Genesis 39 is a picture of a verse that we New Testament Christians really hold on to quite a bit in Romans. The verse is Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and it goes like this. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. That's a verse of great comfort for us. We know that God causes all things to work together for good. All things. All things means blessings, and sometimes it means trials. Both things work together for good. And we find that picture of this verse right there in the story of Joseph in Genesis chapter 39. And one of the things we've seen in Genesis is not about the lives of people, it's about God. And God being faithful to His promise to Abraham, who ultimately was going to represent all of His people throughout, as Abraham's promise unfolds in terms of having a great number of children and grandchildren, and basically his seed, his offspring is going to be as the sand of the seashore, and he's going to have the land. And through that we've seen God being faithful during trials, during sin, during faithlessness, during all kinds of things. God is faithful. And now we see in Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob was thrown into a pit. His brothers told his father that he was killed by an animal, even though they put him in the pit and they sold him. And now he's off, and he is now sold into the hands of an Egyptian official. And we're going to see through this that Joseph experiences some blessings and some trials. But in both of them, both blessing and trial, God is working, and He's working behind the scenes, and He's working for Joseph's good and ultimately for the accomplishment of His promise, His faithfulness. That's what He's working for. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 39. Joseph now, we know he has been thrown into a pit, sold to a bunch of Midianite traders who then sold him into Egypt. And that's where we pick up the story in Genesis 39, beginning in verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. So Potiphar was shopping, and he was looking for some help. He needed some slaves, and he got one from these Ishmaelite traders. And again, it just so happened on that day, God orchestrated that he would be there, because we see in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And one thing we learn here is, whether you are free or a slave, the Lord is going to be with you. He's with His people. And Joseph, a child of the promise, is part of this, and he's understanding who his God is. The Lord has not abandoned him. Even though he's in difficult situations, there's a plan. There's a purpose for all this. The Lord was with Joseph. Very key phrase right there in verse 2. Verse 3, now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. Again, when the Lord is with you and you are walking with the Lord, it wasn't just that the Lord was blessing him with him. He saw Joseph and how Joseph relied on his God, how Joseph worshipped his God. He understood that Joseph had a relationship with his God, and he knew that. So he knew that the Lord was with him. Not just some unseen force. He knew that the Lord was with him because he knew who he was. You see, it's different if he was just being blessed. That would say that essentially his master would say that there's something with Joseph. I don't know what it is, but his master said, no, the Lord is with Joseph. So verse 4, so Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in charge. So Potiphar knew what kind of man Joseph was, and he knew that he worshipped this God. He didn't know anything about this God, but he knew that Joseph had a relationship with this God, and it was really benefiting. So Potiphar actually trusted Joseph, because in worshiping God, your life is one of integrity, and Potiphar could see that. So it came about that from time to time, it came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Notice that he didn't just bless the Egyptian's house. He blessed his house on account of Joseph. So the blessings all came with things that Joseph did, decisions that Joseph made. So on account of Joseph, he was blessed. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field, everywhere. Everywhere Joseph made decisions, blessing followed. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. You know what? It's interesting that Moses put that little statement in there. He didn't have to. But he wants us to know that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Joseph was blessed with physical appearance of what was attractive in that day for the people around. He was productive, he was strong, he could accomplish things, and he was attractive. That's a great blessing. But there's a picture here that I want us to see. It's a physical blessing, a blessing of physical appearance. And you know what it did? It led Joseph to a trap. See, we pray sometimes for physical blessings, things that the Lord would bless us with, and we're so pleased when he does, and it just happens from time to time, and people have different physical, just physical appearances. That blessing is not always a blessing. It might be to appease just our gratification of our flesh or things like that, but this blessing led to a trap. Now, that doesn't mean God gave it to him so he would curse him. He gave it to him, which is a great thing. But don't think that it won't lead to other things if you're not mentally prepared, if you're not spiritually prepared. You see, it doesn't just mean, oh, God loved Joseph so much he blessed him and made him physically attractive. No, he did. He made him physically attractive. That's how it was. But that blessing came with some obligations, some trial that's going to test Joseph. It actually was used in a way that would grow Joseph spiritually. Verse 7, it came about after these things that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. So now he's got a problem. Potiphar's wife is now coming after Joseph when Potiphar's at work. Potiphar's wife is not a person with integrity. She doesn't care about Potiphar. She just wants to satisfy herself. Verse 8, but he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he's put all that he owns in my charge. There's no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? You see, Joseph knew the laws of God. He knew that marriage came from God. He said he's not withheld anything from me except for you, and that makes sense because you're his wife. You'd never share a wife, because the two become one. Joseph knew that. And so he's explaining that in this case, how could you do this? How could I do this great evil and sin against God? You see, this is what kept Joseph straight right here. Here's one of our lessons. When you're in the midst of this trial, when you're going through what you don't understand, I mean, it wasn't fair. Your brother sold you, and now you're in this situation. But one thing that Joseph held tight to, he didn't want justice. He didn't demand that everybody figure out the truth and try to make his case. He realized this is the situation God put him in. Nothing he can do about it. It's not right, for sure. It's not just, yes. But Joseph was concerned mostly about sinning against his God. He saw whatever sins he did were against his God, not against other people. And when you see that your sin is against God, it will change your behavior totally. And so that's what he saw here. And so he said, how can I do this great evil and sin against your God? So as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her, to lie beside her or be with her. He wouldn't listen. And this happened day after day after day. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household was there inside. So everybody's outside, Joseph's inside doing something, and she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. I mean, that was the right thing to do. He was trapped. There's nothing he could do. She came in. knew that nobody was around, and then she says, "Now I've got you," and grabbed his garment and said, "Here's your chance right here." And he got out of his coat or shirt, whatever it was. He got out of his garment and he ran, fled. That's what Paul told Timothy: flee sexual immorality. Well, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to be to lie with me, and I screamed." Now that's something. Everything Joseph did was wise. Everything Joseph did multiplied the house of Potiphar. Everything Joseph did was to everyone's benefit. And he was kind. He had integrity. So she screams out to these men, "Oh, look at this. This Hebrew came in to make sport of me." I think these workers knew who Potiphar's wife was. I think they knew all about her. And they just looked and said, "Yeah, right. Yeah, right. I mean, but what are we going to do? I mean, we're just slaves." She's trying to find people that would agree. Verse 15, when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. Yeah, you were a victim, sure. Yeah, I got that. The men understood. Joseph was the victim, not Potiphar's wife. Well, they couldn't say anything. Verse 16, so she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words: "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came into me to make sport of me. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." So she's got her own story. Slaves aren't going to go against her. They're out there, they don't count. So again, Joseph experiences great injustice. Great injustice. But his number one concern in the face of great injustice is you don't want to sin against your God. That's a much bigger issue than the injustice that's coming to you. And you entrust your lives to a faithful Creator. 1 Peter chapter 4 tells us. Entrust your lives to a faithful Creator who knows what to do. Well, verse 19, when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in jail. Obviously, if he was truly angry, he would have him killed, tried to rape my wife. But I think he also understood who his wife was and said, okay, if Joseph did that, he did step over the line, and I'm going to deal with him. But I also know you put him up to it. So he put him in jail. And then verse 21, this is Romans 8:28 right here. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. See, we might ask, well, if God was kind to him and extended kindness to him, then why did he keep him in jail? Why did he let these injustices happen? How can a good God let this happen to Joseph? And the answer is providence. The answer is providence, pro video. It's a word, you take the Latin, pro video, means to see beforehand. You see, God understood beforehand where Joseph's going. And he's going to get him in front of Pharaoh. How do you get him in front of Pharaoh? You get him to Egypt first, and then you get him in jail first, or as a slave first, and then you got to go from the slave to the jail, and then in jail he's going to interpret dreams, which he's going to meet people in jail where he interprets their dreams, gets a reputation, and that puts him in front of Pharaoh. God's working behind the scenes. Romans 8:28. The Lord was with Joseph, even though it's tough. Even though, because he had a blessing of being handsome in appearance, that got him in trouble with Potiphar's wife. It wasn't his fault, but a blessing led to a trap. He understood how to deal with a trap. He can't get away. All he can do is flee, but that doesn't stop the unjust consequences that are coming his way, because that's all part of the Lord's plan. The Lord's with him. He entrusted himself to the Lord while he's going through this. Verse 22, the chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. So the prosperity that came with Joseph, it just went with him from Potiphar's house to the jail. No doubt Potiphar's house started to experience a decline in productivity. Joseph's gone. I think Potiphar knew that. But now the jailer has all kinds of things. We don't know what they were, but we know that God gave him favor. For some reason, the chief jailer liked Joseph. He saw what kind of a man of integrity he was. And he put him in charge of all the prisoners, so he could think. Probably the other prisoners couldn't think, and so Joseph could communicate and showed responsibility. And whatever Joseph did, the Lord made to prosper. Romans 8:28. In the midst of great difficulty, in the midst of unjust circumstances, the Lord is working. Romans 8:28. God causes all things to work together for good. All things. Joseph's handsome in appearance, Joseph not sinning against his God, being unjustly thrown into jail for the accusation of attacking his master's wife, and going into jail and having to deal with now prisoners. God causes all things to work together for good. That's what he does for his people who love him and are called according to his purpose. That's what we see here, right here in Genesis 39. Because we know the story and where it's going and where Joseph's got to be headed to help his people and ultimately fulfill God's promise. God is moving, God is working through Genesis, through the lives of these people. And that's our story in Genesis. So we'll see you next in our devotion in Genesis chapter 40.